Yo, what's good? Big Z here, and today I'm going to show you guys how to make this. I'll play it one more time with the acapella in there. Unfortunately, I didn't have the dry acapella, so I couldn't make the same vocal chops he did, but I'll show you a little bit about how he made those vocal chops and how he messed with the formant of them. But here it is with the acapella in there.
Yeah, it's
So that is my remake of Funny by ZEDD. If you want all the samples and presets and stuff I used, then you can download those for free below. But I also use a lot of processing on the presets and stuff, so I think it'd help more if you just watch the video. So honestly, I think the main thing that makes this track so cool is how punchy and big the drums sound. I'll solo all the drums, and all the little like flams and different layers he does with the drums make it sound really big. So we've got the main kick that's keeping the groove of the track. But then we have these offbeat kicks that don't have as much sub-frequency in them that add to the groove. Then the snare down here, I've actually ended up using like 4 or 5 different layers. I'm sure they didn't use this many layers, but they all serve a purpose. So the main punch of the snare comes from this sound. We've got a wider layer here. And we've got this crunchy layer that just makes it sound a little bit more distorted and just kind of dirty, which we want for this snare. Then we've got like an acoustic snare tail. Just add some more length to the whole snare. Then every other snare, we have this pitched anvil sound. Then all of this stuff down here is really just percussion to keep the groove going and add some energy with the crashes. Let's get into some of these synth sounds. I'm going to start with the bass just because I think it's the coolest sound in this track. And here's that pitch bend you heard during that one part. So in Serum, this is just a saw wave, one voice of unison right here. In the effects section, I just have some multi-band compression, formant filter, and this EQ on here, cutting off the high end. Here, I'll just add everything one by one, because I'm doing most of the processing externally. So here's the saw wave. I've got mono check down here. The formant filter is what gives it that really cool characteristic. So that's where the bulk of that tone is coming from. And I have the drive cranked all the way up on the formant filter and the mix just at about 25%. So you can mess with those cutoff and formant knobs to get different cool characteristics out of it. And then I just cut off the high end with this EQ. But then if I add in the external processing, it sounds a lot better. So here's before the processing, here's after. So I just have a few different EQs on there. I know they're gonna look a little bit crazy, but this is just how I ended up with the EQs while I was mixing it to get the tone similar to the original. So I've got those EQs on there. I've added this ozone imager just to widen it up a little bit. And then after that, I added another EQ because after I widened it up, I wanted everything below like 150 hertz to be mono. Then I just have this little room reverb on there to put it in a little space. So I'm sending that to my bass bus and just sidechaining it to the kick. So let's move on to this whole chord stack here. So first in the stack is the bulk of the sound. We have these saw chords. They're really basic, I'll show you in a second. But layered with them, I have this reverb layer. Then I have this attack layer to give it more punch and attack. Then I have this piano stab layer, which works really nicely with the saw chords. You barely hear the piano in the original mix, but I think it's definitely there and adding a lot of power to those chords. And during that one part, just to switch it up a little bit, I added these horns right here. Just to make that one chord sound a little bit more lush and full. So you'll see the main saw chords really do not have a lot going on here. If I open up Serum, first of all, here's the MIDI if you want to check it out. So in Serum, it's just a saw wave, 7 voices of unison, and some detune on there. Over in the global tab, I did change the mode from linear to super, and that does spread the different voices of unison differently across the spectrum than linear mode. It just sounds a little more natural to me. But anyway, I just have a little bit of attack on this envelope right here that's modulating the volume, so like 20 milliseconds of attack. And then the only effect I have in Serum is this compressor right here. Externally, I'm adding some more compression. And I'm adding some EQ here. Then I'm adding a tiny bit of saturation that's not really doing much. And then I'm sending that to my synth bus, which is where all of these sounds are going to. So if I take those effects off, all I'm doing is adding a little bit of OTT, and I'm also adding FabFilter Saturn to saturate the high end. So I've boosted the high end up here just a tiny bit to give it a little more brightness. Then I'm obviously sidechaining everything to the kick too. So instead of doing a normal reverb send for this track, I wanted to add a whole nother reverb layer in which I just copied the same preset down and I added a reverb to it and put it at 100% mix. This is like the same thing as a reverb send, but I didn't want the reverb to play on every chord. So you see up here, if I go to the normal saw chords, you'll see these chords in between. But down here on the reverb track, you won't see those chords. And that's just so the reverb only affects the stabs at the beginning of the beats. And if I go back to this track, you'll also see I'm sending it to a bus right here that has no output, and that's just so I can sidechain the reverb to that signal. So I'm sidechaining the reverb to bus 26, which is the saw chords. So you won't be able to hear this next layer in the full mix that well, but it definitely makes a difference. It's just an attack layer. All I did is copy the same preset down, and I really shortened the decay and sustain and everything. And then in envelope 3, I'm modulating the master tuner just to make it a little bit more punchy. Then this piano stab is coming from True Pianos. It's the Sapphire piano. I just turned the reverb off and turned the keyboard dynamics all the way up. I'm adding some compression on there too. Then I also have some EQ on there. And then I'm sending it to the synth bus with everything else so everything gets glued together. The horn layer is coming from Contact. Let me see what preset it is. It's probably in the VSL brass section. So yeah, it's the brass ensemble preset in the VSL brass section. But that's not that necessary of a layer. I just added it in there. So all of those stacked chords just sound so full when you add the bass underneath it. So there's these muted guitars in the second half of the drop, and I just remade them in Nexus. They sound terrible. They sound way better in the original song, but that was kind of the last thing I added, so I just threw it in there. But those aren't that important. They just kind of keep the rhythm and vibe going and switch it up for the second half. This little chord fill here is just a saw wave that's having its pitch modulated. I guess I added a second oscillator too from the vowel section, but I'm just modulating the pitch with LFO1 here. So you can see I dragged it up to the fine tune. And you can hear that pitch moving back and forth. It doesn't sound good by itself, but layered with everything else, it sounds pretty cool. So I also want to talk about the vocal chops in the drop. So he obviously chopped up the vocals and they sound really bright and saturated, but there's also something cool going on with the formant. I don't have the dry studio acapella, so I can't show you with this vocal how they were made, but I can show you some similar processing with just a random free splice vocal. So here's what the vocal sounds like dry.
Oh na na na, oh na na na.
So you'll notice in funny, he's kind of shifting the formant of the vocal around, and a great way to do this is the Infected Mushroom Manipulator plugin. So I can go in here, I can go to Sequencer, I'll change it to 2 bars, and then I'll just increase this formant green knob right here and kind of mess around with it.
Oh na na na, oh na na na.
So that's an extreme example, just so you can hear the formant moving back and forth with this sequencer.
Oh na na na, oh na na na, oh na na na. Oh na na na.
So that's a cool trick just to kind of automate the formant of vocal chops and give them a little bit of movement. But they're also like super saturated vocals, so I would probably use FabFilter Saturn and just saturate them a little bit.
Oh na na na, oh na na na, oh na na na, oh na na na.
I just turned up the drive so they're just kind of distorted.
Oh na na na.
And they're wider in the stereo spectrum, so I would probably use Soundtoys Micro Shift for that.
Oh na na na, oh na na na, oh na na na.
So I'm not saying this is exactly what he did at all, but it should just give you an idea of how to mess around with your vocal chops and make them sound a little more interesting like he did in this track. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Like I said, you can download the drum samples and the presets, even though there's a lot of external processing on the presets, so you'll probably find the drum samples more helpful, but you can get all that stuff for free below. And other than that, I'll catch you next time. Peace.
Yeah, it's fun.